I want to open this sermon with something that I read at the kickoff for our youth conference that we had a little bit ago on the theme of consecration, which is what we're talking about this morning in this morning's message. I read, this is from someone who called himself Methodist. Who wrote this, we don't know, except it was in circulation in the first 100 years AD. And he was describing what Christians were like. I want to read what he said. He said, "For the Christians are distinguished from other men neither by country nor language nor the customs which they observe. For they neither inhabit cities of their own nor employ a peculiar form of speech nor lead a life which is marked out by any singularity. The course of conduct which they follow has not been devised by any speculation or deliberation of inquisitive men, nor do they, like some, proclaim themselves the advocates of any merely human doctrines. But inhabiting Greek as well as barbarian cities, according as the lot of each of them is determined, and following the customs of the natives in respect to clothing, food, and the rest of their ordinary conduct, they display to us their wonderful and confessedly striking method of life. They dwell in their own countries, but simply as sojourners. As citizens, they share in all things with others, and yet endure with all things as if foreigners. Every foreign land is to them as their native country, and every land of their birth as a land of strangers. They marry, as do all others, they beget children, but they do not destroy their offspring. They have a common table, but not a common bed. They're in the flesh, but they do not live after the flesh. They pass their days on earth, but they're citizens of heaven. They obey the prescribed laws and at the same time surpass the laws by their lives. They love all men and are persecuted by all. They're unknown and condemned. They're put to death and restored to life. They're poor, yet make many rich. They are in lack of all things and yet abound in all. They are dishonored and yet in their very dishonor are glorified. They are evil spoken of and yet are justified. They are reviled and bless. They are insulted and repay the insult with honor. They do good yet are punished as evildoers. When punished, they rejoice as if quickened into life. They are assailed by the Jews as foreigners and are persecuted by the Greeks. Yet those who hate them are unable to assign any reason for their hatred. To sum up all in one word, what the soul is in the body, that are Christians in the world. The soul is dispersed through all the members of the body, and Christians are scattered through all the cities of the world. The soul dwells in the body, yet is not of the body. And Christians dwell in the world, yet are not of the world. The invisible soul is guarded by the visible body, and Christians are known indeed to be in the world, but their godliness remains invisible. The flesh hates the soul and wars against it, though itself suffering no injury, because it's prevented from enjoying pleasures. The world also hates the Christians, though in no wise injured, because they abjure pleasures. The soul loves the flesh that hates it, and loves also the members. Christians likewise love those who hate them. The soul is imprisoned in the body, yet preserves that very body. And Christians are confined in the world as in a prison, and yet they are the preservers of the world." That was the testimony of the first century Christians. I wonder, how would the modern historian characterize the customs, behaviors, and character of the church today? Would the description be noble? Would the description be one of disdain? Would the description be lukewarm, possibly vague? Just another multi in the multicultural melting pot of society? I want to talk to you this morning about two concepts that are very similar. In fact, they are easily mistaken for one another, but they're different. They go together. They're intertwined with one another. And that is the concepts of sanctification and consecration. These two things are so similar that it's really hard to define one without the other. But if I were to try to make a distinction, sanctification means to be set apart by God from a profane to a sacred use, to be made holy. Consecration is sanctification in a sense, but it is the action of making or declaring something sacred, ordaining to a sacred office. Consecration is sanctification in action. So sanctification is being set apart unto God for a special purpose. Consecration is really the external acting out of that sanctification. It is the living the life of that which you've been set apart by God. And to illustrate the idea of consecration, we have it discussed in Exodus chapter 29 and Leviticus chapter 8. There is a picture of the term consecration in the ceremony of the consecration of the priests. And those chapters describe the process and the ceremony and the acts and the behaviors and the customs that are adopted when a profane individual, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but a common individual takes on the customs and the behaviors and the attributes and the way of doing things of what a priest is supposed to do. The ceremony of the consecration of the priest taking on the customs of the priesthood. They're separated unto God. It is a process and a ceremony of forsaking my way of doing things and doing things His way, or the way of the priesthood. So it is I understand that part of this role means I am laying down my way to go the way of the priesthood, to do what the priesthood is expected to do. So it is beyond just, this is the moral law. It is not just the laws, because the laws are the same. It is a special custom and behavior that is associated and expected with the office to which one is called. Forsaking my own way to adopt the way, behaviors, and customs from God to be a priest. That is a picture of consecration. We see consecration in the story of the revival that took place in Israel under Hezekiah in 2 Chronicles chapter 29 through 31. We see very clearly that when this revival takes place, we see very clearly both components, sanctification and consecration, linked closely together. The sanctification of the people. In other words, the people went from profane and ungodly to consecrated to God, to set apart unto God. And so they sanctified themselves. They became holy. They left the traditions, the pagan traditions that got them in trouble with God in the first place, and they were restored in their purpose, a restoration to holiness. And then we see in that story, we see the consecration for temple service. When the people are sanctified, then the priests were consecrated to serve in the temple. They not only got the morality right, the laws right, but they took on the customs and behaviors. They restored those things to the priesthood. And we see not only the consecration and sanctification of the people in the priesthood, but we see that the tithes and the offerings and the sacrifices, all of those are called consecrated. The money itself becomes holy as it's given towards the temple. The sacrifices that are made, there is this restoration of purpose that is taking place, and this carrying out of purpose in these new customs and behavior of someone that's been made holy. And so when we see the concept of consecration and sanctification, again, sanctification being set apart unto God, from a profane use to a sacred use, from a common purpose to a special purpose. There is the lifestyle and conduct and behaviors and additional customs that go with someone that's been sanctified. This is beyond rule keeping. This is an additional custom, that the customs themselves are to preserve the rule. And sanctification and consecration are very important. And if there's a separation between these two terms, it leads to trouble. In fact, as I'm studying these terms, I'm finding that you can be consecrated and not sanctified, and you can be sanctified and not consecrated. We see an example of consecration that's being set aside for a special purpose, taking on the customs and the forms, without being sanctified. In other words, you've taken on the forms of religion, but you're unclean, you're unholy, you're defiled. So you can be consecrated, disconnected from sanctification. And we see some important allegories, true stories, but allegories of what happens when you're consecrated but not sanctified. We see that first in the story in Judges chapter 17 of Micah the idolater in the time of the judges. We see, it says in Judges chapter 17 verse 5, it says, the man Micah had a shrine and made an ephod and household idols. And it says he consecrated one of his sons who became his priest. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So we see that God did not sanctify his son to be a priest. God did not sanctify Micah, who's an idolater, who decides he's going to add a little dab of true faith to his paganism. And he's going to consecrate his own priest. He's going to set his son, and he said, this will be great. Verse 12, he says, and then he does this again because he finds a Levite. And it says in verse 12, it says, so Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, now I know that the Lord will be good to me since I have a Levite as a priest. And so he was consecrating, but it wasn't sanctified. And so as the story goes on, which we're not reading this morning, but in Judges chapter 17 is one of the most screwed up, demented stories in all of Scripture. And we see that God is truly not pleased with Micah's action of consecrating something because he didn't have anything to do with it. We see the importance again of what happens when something is consecrated without being sanctified in the story of Jeroboam when he consecrated the wicked priest. In 1 Kings 13, it says this in verse 33, it says, after this event, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way, but again he made priests from every class of people for the high places. Whoever wished, he consecrated him, and he became one of the priests of the high places. And this thing was the sin of the house of Jeroboam, so as to exterminate and destroy it from the face of the earth. What was Jeroboam's sin as he starts consecrating and dedicating things and saying, we're going to put you in this office. We're going to put you, anybody that wants it, you can have it, you take it, you do it. And it is so offensive to God that God destroys Jeroboam and his house because he was consecrating things that weren't sanctified. And we see another vivid illustration in Uzziah's trespass. Remember King Uzziah, he was a good king, but he got in trouble with God. In 2 Chronicles chapter 26, verse 16, it says, but when he was strong in his heart was lifted up to his destruction. For he transgressed against the Lord his God by entering the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. So Azariah the priest went in after him, and with him were 80 priests of the Lord, valiant men. And they withstood King Uzziah and said to him, it is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests, the sons of Aaron, who are consecrated to burn incense. Get out of the sanctuary, for you have trespassed. You shall have no honor from the Lord God. Then Uzziah became furious, and he had a censer in his hand to burn incense. And that's what happens when you have someone that's unclean and dirty, that's consecrated themselves, and you try and correct them, they get furious. It says, then Uzziah became furious, and he had a censer in his hand to burn incense. And while he was angry with the priests, leprosy broke out on his forehead before the priests in the house of the Lord beside the incense altar. And Azariah the chief priest and all the priests looked at him, and there on his forehead he was leprous. So they thrust him out of that place. Indeed, he also hurried to get out because the Lord had struck him. King Uzziah was a leper until the day of his death. He dwelled in an isolated house because he was a leper, for he was cut off from the house of the Lord. Then Jotham his son was over the king's house, judging the people of the land. This is an amazingly tragic. He consecrated himself without being consecrated by God. He was not sanctified, and it says he was struck with leprosy. The disease of leprosy, more than any other sin in Scripture, is a direct type of sin. I want you to understand how leprosy works, that it is a disease that eats away at you until you're dead. What it's saying is someone that's not sanctified, that has consecrated themselves when they are unclean, trying to act on God's behalf, that is, they would get struck with leprosy in the sense is that sin, even though they may not have physical leprosy, they will find a sin problem that is eating them away while they are in rebellion to God, consecrating themselves instead of being sanctified and sent by God. There are, even at any given moment, there are some people that in our midst, in our own church, that are consecrated themselves, but they are not sanctified. There are a few people that this is a warning from God to you. However, this is not the major danger that deals with most people. It may deal with a handful, but this is not the major threat that we have to, this is not the major pitfall that most believers would fall into. The major pitfall is not the ones that weren't sanctified but were consecrated themselves. The major pitfall is the ones that were sanctified, that God sanctified them and made them clean for a purpose, but they don't go on to live a consecrated life. You can be sanctified but not live a consecrated life. This morning I want to expound on the concept of consecration as it is represented most starkly in the Old Testament Nazirite vow. And then I want to explore the lessons of Samson, how it's a story of infidelities, is a warning to the modern believer, as well as a brief but legitimate picture of redemption, unmerited favor even, that is a mixture of both tragedy and mercy. So if we're to understand consecration, there is no better place to start than looking at this thing, and turn in your Bibles to Numbers chapter 6, because we're going to get into it, the Nazirite vow. Because as we understand the Nazirite vow, we'll see the beauty and the template of what God created in the principle of consecration. Numbers chapter 6, starting in verse 1, it says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when either a man or woman consecrates an offering to take the vow of a Nazirite to separate himself to the Lord." So what was the Nazirite vow for? It was to be separated unto God to fulfill a certain purpose. A certain vow and purpose. A person made a vow to God. They were on a mission. They're going to do something for God, and they were not done until the vow and the mission was completed. They strictly followed the rules of that vow, of that Nazirite vow, until mission was accomplished. And that was the Nazirite vow. We see the Apostle Paul, even in the book of Acts, we see at least, I believe it's 2 times mentioned that Paul took a vow. It looks like he took the Nazirite vow itself. So you could take a vow to fulfill a certain purpose that was a mission, that until you had completed your mission, until you had fulfilled your vow, you adhered to these rules. And so there's basically 3 big rules, the 3 big components to the vow. Rule number 1, we see in Numbers 6 verse 3 as we read on, it says, "He shall separate himself from wine and similar drink. He shall drink neither vinegar made from wine nor vinegar made from similar drink. Neither shall he drink any grape juice nor eat fresh grapes or raisins. All the day of his separation he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, from seed to skin." Now, rule number 1, the short version, is no wine. The simplest, shortest version is no wine. But I want you to see the gravity and the attitude and the degree with which the Nazirite abstained from wine. It's like he says, you know what, rule number 1, if you're going to be Nazirite, no wine. Well, wait a minute, let's back up. No similar drink either. You can't have wine, you can't have anything similar to wine. Actually, you can't have vinegar that's been made from wine either. Oh, and you know what, I better tack on there, you can't have vinegar that's been made by something that's similar to wine either. You know what? Why don't you stay away from grape juice too? Actually, no grapes. Just grapes are out. Raisins, no. No raisins. No raisins, no grapes, no wine, no similar drink to wine, no vinegar made from wine, no vinegar made from something similar to wine, no grapes, no raisins, no grape juice. All the days of his separation he shall eat nothing. You know what? We'll go even, just stay away from grapevines, period. Don't go anywhere near the grapevine. Don't have anything to do with the grapevines. Stay away from, you know what? Seeds of grapes, those are out too. Skin, you can't have the grape skin. Stay away from all of it. And so, now this is a bit almost extreme, but it's almost like he's dealing with teenagers. It reminds me of every year with the teens, we do something called the Awakening, where we fast and read the Bible and pray for 21 days. And there's a day where we do the Daniel's fast, which is no fruits and vegetables. And what we see every year that we do this is there is definitely some leniency and some loopholes that are going on in this rule that for one teenager, no fruits and vegetables means, or only fruits and vegetables means all day of eating French fries and strawberry milkshakes. That's not the spirit of what the fast is for. But what you find, even though it's funny and even though it seems a little absurd and a little extreme, that all these things are on the no list, what you find is most people in quite opposite of the Nazirite vow, they want to know where's the line that I'm not supposed to cross, and they're going to hover as close to that line as they can get away with. But the Nazirite, the person who's consecrated, doesn't see what can I get away with. It says, that's the line, God's that way. And they're not just trying to get close to the line, they don't want to go the direction of the line. And the people that always have the problems with that's legalistic, that that's bondage, you're adding all these rules. The reason they have a problem is because they want the wine. So they're having the grapes, they're having the raisins, they're having all those things because they really want the wine. But if you're chasing God, you don't care about those things. Consecration doesn't care about what you can get away with because you're not interested in wine. You're doing this for God. Rule number 1, no wine. And they meant that in the most extreme sense. Don't even go in the vineyard. Don't have any compromise. Don't even give the door for it, the opportunity. Stay away from it. Rule number 2, number 6, verse 5. All the days of the vow of his separation, no razor shall come upon his head until the days are fulfilled for which he separated himself to the Lord. He shall be holy. Then he shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow. So rule number 2 is no razor touches your head. No razor touches your head. You're going to understand some things about Samson that you maybe didn't understand before in the secret of his hair. Because the consecration and the hair was not the thing that was holy. The hair was the credentials that you're consecrated. The hair was like the driver's license that goes with driving a car. It wasn't the hair itself that was holy. It was actually called the consecrated head. It's like this hair that's on my head is covering up and protecting that which has been consecrated to God. No razor touches your head. It was the symbol, it was the external signification of I am holy to God. I am on a holy assignment that I will complete. And no razor is going to touch my head until I have fulfilled my mission. So that was rule number 2. Rule number 3, number 6, verse 6. All the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. He shall not make himself unclean even for his father or his mother, for his brother or his sister when they die, because his separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation he shall be holy to the Lord. And again, we see a parallel to the no wine. We have this extreme importance emphasized Touch nothing dead. Don't even go near death. Don't have anything to do with death. Not for your daddy, not for your mama, not for your brother, not for your sister. If they die, that's on them. You're consecrated to God, as evident by the separation unto God on your head. But it's family. It don't matter, you're consecrated to God. If your mama dies, that's mama's problem. You're on a mission for God, and you're not aborting your purpose to go get entangled with death. Touch nothing dead, don't even go near death. And then there's this clause here that you're on the Nazirite vow. No wine, no razor touching your head, don't touch anything dead. Here's what you do if you break the rules, even by accident, and don't fulfill your vow. You blew it. You broke the rules. Numbers 6, verse 9. And if anyone dies very suddenly beside him, and he defiles his consecrated head, in other words, you got defiled because the dude next to you fell over dead. You didn't do that, but say that's how it happened. So many people say, I just stumbled into sin accidentally. Well, maybe you did. Maybe some dead guy just happened to drop over and fall in your lap. We'll give you the benefit of the doubt that it just happened. I don't know how it happened. Because that's how it always happens, right? It's always these absurd cases, right? It's never having anything to do with something you did. But suppose you're right. You're completely 100% innocent. You're not touching any dead people, and somebody decides to fall over dead in your lap. Okay? You still shave your head on, verse 9. If anyone dies very suddenly beside him and he defiles his consecrated head, then he shall shave his head on the day of his cleansing. On the 7th day he shall shave it. Then on the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons to the priest at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And the priest shall offer one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, and make atonement for him because he sinned in regard to the corpse. And he shall sanctify his head that same day. He shall consecrate to the Lord the days of his separation, and bring a male lamb in its first year as a trespass offering. But the former days shall be lost, because his separation was defiled. He says, the moment you're defiled, all that time where you've been doing the Nazirite thing, it's all worthless. It's gone. You didn't complete it. It's over. It counts for nothing. You don't get a notch in your resume. You didn't complete your vow. You didn't do it to the term. You fell short. It's gone. What do? Shave your head and start over. Make an offering. Get it right before God. Don't mess around. Don't wallow in the mistake. Don't wallow in those things. Shave your head. Start over. If you're defiled with death, shave your head and make an offering. That's what Aaron started to do. And so this process starts over. Make it right that same day. That same day. Make it right and start over. The former days are lost because your separation was defiled. Make a new offering. So that's what happens if you broke that Nazirite vow. You start over. They didn't play games. They didn't patty cake. This was not a Joel Osteen message. This was serious. It's time to grow up. That's the seriousness of the Nazirite vow. They don't expect to pat you on the little bottom or pat you on the head and tell you how wonderful you are. They expect you to walk in the grace of God that was given to you, and they expect you to complete your vow and what you're supposed to do. That there's a grace to do what God's called you to do. He'll help you through it. Suck it up, buttercup, and move forward. And so when you completed your vow, there were 3 major things that had to happen in the completion of the vow. In Numbers 6, verse 13, it says, now this is the law of the Nazirite. When the days of his separation are fulfilled, he shall be brought to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and he shall present his offering to the Lord, 1 male lamb in its first year without blemish as a burnt offering, 1 ewe lamb in its first year without blemish as a sin offering, 1 ram without blemish as a peace offering, a basket of unleavened bread, cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, unleavened wafers anointed with oil, and their grain offering with their drink offerings. Then the priest shall bring them before the Lord and offer his sin offering and his burnt offering. And he shall offer the ram as a sacrifice of a peace offering to the Lord with the basket of unleavened bread. The priest shall also offer its grain offering and its drink offering. Then the Nazarite shall shave his consecrated head at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and shall take the hair from his consecrated head and put it on the fire which is under the sacrifice of the peace offering. And the priest shall take the boiled shoulder of the ram, one unleavened cake from the basket, and one unleavened wafer, and put them upon the hands of the Nazarite after he has shaved his consecrated hair. And the priest shall wave them as a wave offering before the Lord. They're holy for the priest, together with the breast of the wave offering and the thigh of the heave offering. And after that, the Nazarite may drink wine. So in the completion, in the fulfillment of your vow and the ceremony, the three main things that I want to bring out is they came bringing offerings. At the completion of the vow, they came and brought these offerings. In one of the offerings, the second thing so the first one is make an offering. The second one that I want you to see here is that the second one was shave your head and throw your hair into the fire of the peace offering. So that symbol of your holiness and consecration, you're taking off that symbol of what you've done and who you are, and you're taking it off your head and you're throwing it in the fire of the peace offering, which is a thank you offering for fellowship. In other words, God, here's my badge. Here's my medal. Here's what I've earned. Here's what I've done for you. Because I'm so thankful of what you've done in me. Because I'm so thankful to be associated with you, to have relationship with you, to have fellowship with you. I'm cutting off my hair and I'm throwing it in the fire with my peace offering because I love you more than any of that. So in the completion, they made an offering. You were to shave your head and throw your hair into the fire of your peace offering. And thirdly, then you can drink wine. You know, this process is repeated throughout all of human history, is that which you give up for God is restored back to you after you have fulfilled your obedience. The Christian life requires continual sacrifice. And once you've sacrificed, there's a point where God brings it back. This is a very similar concept. In fact, it's the same concept that Jesus said himself. If you don't forsake your life, if you don't let go of your life, you lose it. If you give up your life, if you surrender your life, you find it. This is the principle of the Nazarite vow. Everything that you sacrifice, everything that you lay aside, everything that you give up in service to the Lord, when you do that, when your obedience is completed, God brings it back. But if you say, I can't let go of that. I can't let go of that wrong relationship. I can't let go of that bad habit. I can't let go of that behavior. I can't let go of that stuff. I can't let go of that money. I can't let go of those activities and those places that I go. If you don't let go, you lose it anyway. This is the picture of consecration. Numbers 6, verse 21, I think is the most profound illustration of what consecrated even means. It says, this is the law of the Nazarite who vows to the Lord the offering for his separation. And besides that, whatever else his hand is able to provide, according to the vow which he takes, so he must do according to the law of his separation. And notice that clause, and he brings his offering. Oh, and besides the offering that you bring for your consecration, whatever else your hand is able to provide, you give that too. Why? Because the Nazarite does more than bring an offering. The Nazarite is an offering. That's what consecration means. I'm not just bringing an offering, I am the offering. And whatever I have belongs to God. That's what consecration means. And then we get to a portion of Scripture in the Old Testament that's still famously quoted today, but maybe you never associated its connection with the Nazarite vow, that this is not just a blessing from God, this is a blessing of consecration. And it's found in Numbers chapter 6, verse 22 through 27. And it says, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the way you shall bless the children of Israel. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his his countenance upon you and give you peace. So shall they put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them. God rewards consecration. Now that we know a little something about the Nazirite vow, now let's turn to the story of Samson. Because of what we said, and that's in Judges chapter 13 if you want to turn there, because what we said in the introduction is that you can be sanctified, set apart by God, and not live a consecrated life. This is the story of Samson. And now that you understand the Nazirite vow, you'll see the story of Samson. You'll see a unique expansion of the concept of a Nazirite vow to one's entire life, which itself is a picture of the New Testament believer. Judges 13, verse 1. It says, again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. Now there was a certain man from Zorah of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, indeed, now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now therefore please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean, for behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. And no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. So the woman came and told her husband, saying, a man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God, very awesome. But I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. And he said to me, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now drink no wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb to the day of his death. I want you to see something. This was a new concept. A Nazirite vow theoretically could take a little more than a week. With Samson, that Nazirite vow was from the womb to the death. His special mission, his vow to God, was from the day of his birth to the day of his death. He was on a mission, and his mission was not over till the day that he dies. Guess what? On the day of you became, as Pastor Carey has been using the term, twice born. A holy calling from God fell upon your life. And it does not expire until the day of your grave. Samson is a picture and a story of the modern believer and what God has called the New Testament Christian to do and to be. We can learn from this story. So Samson is consecrated. Verse 24, so the woman bore a son and called his name Samson. And the child grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him at Mahanaim, Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. But there's a key phrase that I think also emphasizes what consecration is, that it's even more extreme than obeying the law. Because again, it's not finding the line, how close can I be and get away with things? It's I'm going that direction. I'm not going to have anything to do with that line, except I know that's not where God is, so I'm going this way. Manoah, in verse 12, asks this question of the angel of the Lord concerning Samson. He says this, verse 12, and in this question we see really the key of consecration that I want us to walk away with a better understanding. Manoah said, after he'd heard this thing about Samson and his purpose, he says, now let your words come to pass. What will be the boy's rule of life and his work? Think about that question. See, as a Christian, the unbeliever doesn't care that you're sanctified. They don't care the laws that you believe and don't believe. They're looking at how you carry yourself. They're looking at the customs of your life. They're not looking, well, I don't disobey this rule and I do obey this rule. They're looking at the customs and manner and behavior and how you carry yourself, how you talk, what's your work ethic on the job, what is the code around the law of your life that reflects that you are indeed genuine. It is not your sanctification that impresses the lost. It is your consecration. It is not your rule keeping that impresses the lost. It is your manner of life in accordance with that law that impresses the lost. What did Daniel get in trouble for that he was thrown in the lion's den? He was praying 3 times a day with the window open. What scripture in the Bible said Daniel had to do that? None. It was not a picture of his sanctification. It was his consecration. His natural habits reflected that he belonged to God. And the Christian that just says, because I'm sanctified, I can do what I want, has missed everything. Because the world is not impressed with a testimony that looks just like them in the mirror, except they go to church on Sunday. It is your customs. It is your behavior. It is how you carry yourself that speaks of who you are. That is the hair upon your head that says that you're truly consecrated. It's not about the rules. It's about the things that show that you respect the rules. It's about your purpose. It's about your pursuit. It's about what are you after. Because people are going to know what you're after. They're going to know what your priorities are. You can flush all your talk down the toilet if your behavior contradicts your lip service. So Samson was consecrated, and his father asked the right question. He says, what will be the boy's rule of life and his work? He didn't ask, what's the moral law? He asked, how's he supposed to behave? He asked, what are the additional customs that, because it was like the consecration of the priesthood. That yes, they have to, whether you're a priest, a Levite or not, or you're just an average Joe, God's moral law is the same. But if you're going to wear a certain mantle, then there's some customs also that follow suit with that obedience to the law that tells people that you're for real. And so Samson is consecrated. He's a Nazirite, and his parents become Nazirites. And there's a lesson in that. And that's your kids won't do what you say as much as you do what you do. And so if they're going to raise a son to be a Nazirite, then they themselves are going to have to take on a Nazirite lifestyle so that they'll respect it and they'll honor it. And that's free. So Samson is consecrated, and we know what happens to Samson. He gets himself into some serious woman trouble. Some serious problems. And not just, we think of Samson and Delilah, but he had women trouble long before even Delilah came around. He was already lusting after sleazy women. Sleazy, worldly women, he was after them. And it says in Judges 14, verse 1, it says, now Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So he went up and told his father and mother, saying, I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife. See, this is the peril of wrong associations and lust. If you want the world and you covet the world and you want the people in the world, it's going to violate your consecration. It's going to pull you into a different lifestyle. You're sacrificing your calling to have what that is offering. You're sacrificing your calling to have what the world has. That's what you're doing. So Samson gets into woman trouble. And guess what? He's lusting after the wrong woman. He's chasing the wrong woman. He's lusting after the Philistines, but he's still a Nazirite, right? But it's his lust that leads him into breaking systematically his vows. Because we get to verse 5, it says this. There's a lot of words in the story of Samson that we'll just read over and not even know why they're in there. But if you understand the Nazirite vow, you start to understand the importance of these words. In verse 5, it says, so Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother and came to the vineyards of Timnah. Now, to his surprise, the young lion came roaring against him. Where did Samson get in trouble? He was in a place that he had no business even being, hanging out in the vineyards in Timnah. I mean, is the guy a Nazarite or isn't he? What's he doing in that wrong place? Well, it's okay for me to be that's legalistic. It's okay for me to be in the vineyards as long as I'm not eating the grapes. We make all kinds of excuses, don't we? Justifications for being a place we know we ain't got no business being. But we go there, and we get it ourselves in a compromised situation. We give the devil opportunity to take us out, and we fall into it every time. It's not a sin to be in the vineyards. I think that's an excessively strict interpretation of the Nazarite vow. Look at this. A young lion came roaring against him. Where did his attack come? It came while he was in the vineyards. Guess what? You dabble in the vineyards. That's where the lion comes after you too. But what did Numbers chapter 6, verse 3 through 4 say? It says, he shall separate himself from wine and similar drink. He shall drink neither vinegar made from wine or vinegar made from similar drink. Neither shall he drink any grape juice nor eat fresh grapes or raisins all the days of his separation. And he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine from seed to skin. Samson enters the vineyards of Timnah, compromising the first rule. Now he's not just compromised with sin, he's jeopardizing his calling. He's not just flirting with sin, he's jeopardizing his life purpose and calling. Look at Judges 14, verse 6. So he responds to the lion attack. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand, but he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. Sin has pleasure for a season. After some time, when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. He took some of it in his hands and went along eating. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. Well, I guess he entertains the pleasures of sin. He goes to a place he has no being. He falls into sin. And guess what? The other part of his vow seems a little excessive too. Don't touch anything dead. Well, I'd rather have what's sweet than do what's holy. I see that sweet thing. I want that sweet. And my desire to have that sweet is more important to me than my desire to be holy. How do you get in that mindset? You get in that mindset because you're hanging out in the vineyards of Timnah. And when you hang out in the vineyards of Timnah and you get attacked by a lion, and then you get entangled in a fleshly association with a distraction and something sent by the devil, and sin has pleasure for a season, all of a sudden those excessive Nazarite vows seem a little pointless. But it said in Numbers 6, verse 6, all the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. Samson touches death, defiling himself and others. What did he do? He brought that honey to his mom and dad, who were also Nazarites, who had also consecrated themselves. He defiled them, and they didn't even know it. Much like the illustration of if a guy falls over dead next to you and you're defiled. Guess what? If you've got a rebellious prodigal that you're enabling, that's living in sin, that's defiled themselves, if you continue that association, it defiles you too. You suffer. You may not have done it. You may not have on purpose done it, but you experience the pain of their sin just because you're connected to them. You suffer just by connection to them. You suffer because you're enabling their sin and you become a partaker of their defilement. So Samson touches death, defiling himself and others. The first rule was bent and broken. Second rule broken. One to go. What's left? Samson's hair. He's broke the first two. But he's going to take these other two rules. He's not through breaking either of these rules, by the way. He continues to break them both by increasing measure and degree. He gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. That is the nature of sin. That is the leprosy of sin associated with that violation of consecration. It says in Judges 14, verse 10, so his father went down to the woman, and Samson gave a feast there, for young men used to do so. So here we see Samson feasting with Philistines for 7 days. I don't know about you, but I have a few ideas of what a Philistine feast over a week might be like, and it probably doesn't have anything to do with the Nazirite vow. I have a feeling if you're running in circles with Philistines, you're going to be doing some Philistine things that you got no business doing. Samson starts running with the Philistines, and I just have this feeling that his feast involved a lot of this. A lot of that. A lot more than just being in a vineyard. A lot more than just being in the wrong place. Now he's sampling the merchandise. Hanging out with them. Bad company. Samson bends and breaks the first rule again, this time even worse. We won't get into all the details of Samson's story, but it's at this event that he offers this famous riddle. He offers this riddle to the Philistines. He makes a bet. Real spiritual guy, Samson. He makes a bet and offers a prize. His wife, the woman he wants to be with, Philistine woman, tells the answer to the Philistines, so now Samson's got to pay up. And he's furious. He's absolutely furious, and he starts killing bad guys to take their stuff to pay his vow. And while he's doing that, while he's mad, he's so out of control and he's so angry that his father gives his daughter to his best man. He loses the girl while he's out there doing this stuff, defiling him. So he's not just touching death, he's killing people now. While he's out doing that, he loses the girl that he sacrificed everything to get. And he loses her to his best man, Philistine. To his Philistine best man gets her. How about that? The girl's father gives her to Samson's pagan best friend. What a sad story this is. Samson's not only touching dead things at this point, he's on a killing spree. He's transgressed the rule to the extreme. But look at this. This is interesting to me. Judges 15, verse 3. And Samson said to them, "This time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them." Then Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and he took torches, turned the foxes tail to tail, and put a torch between each pair of tails. When he had set the torches on fire, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and burned up both the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. There we see vineyards again. Isn't it interesting that Samson has this ability to disassociate himself from his sin? He was in the vineyards he had no business being in, and yet somehow he's rationalized to the point where he is destroying their vineyards and despising their vineyards. Look at their vineyards, those wicked people. He entered their vineyards. It's almost like the story of the guy that, and I don't mean to be crude, but it is really the same picture of the guy who's so calloused that he gets a prostitute and he doesn't see the evil of his own sin because he just looks down on her. Well, she's the prostitute. That's essentially what Samson is doing, is he's destroying the object of sin that he fell into and chased after that got him in trouble in the first place. He's despising the sins and the object of his fall in the Philistines, but he's not making the connection that he's connected with those same vineyards that he just destroyed. Destroying the vineyards of someone else, but not seeing the vineyards in his own life. Samson aborts his purpose for another purpose altogether. In Judges 15 through 16, it says he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached out his hand and took it and killed 1,000 men with it. Then Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey I have slain 1,000 men. He goes from don't touch death to touching death to bringer of death. You know, I don't think I've ever understood the story of Samson. I always thought Samson was cool and anointed because he killed lots of bad guys. But do you know that was the opposite, and that was the breaking of the Nazirite vow? Samson's grace was not that he could kill bad guys. His grace was that those bad guys could not kill him. I want you to see something. He was called to be a righteous judge in Israel. He was untouchable. He had impenetrable strength. Anytime his enemies came against him, he mocked them and sent them away with their tails tucked between their legs. God had graced him to bring that same spirit over the nation of Israel. His dominion that he walked in personally, that was a reflection of his gift, was supposed to be the dominion and the blessing and the establishment of the entire nation of Israel. But because he was backslid, instead of establishing the dominion of the people of God, he was reduced to simply usurping the dominion of wicked people. I want you to see that all of these great feats were a lesser calling than what God had in mind. They were a lower thing. He had more in mind for Samson than just that he could kill bad guys. He wanted to make the nation of Israel established and fortified and strong. But he wasted it. And then we know the story. He breaks the final rule and all is lost. The story of Delilah in Judges chapter 16, verse 15 says, "Then she said to him, 'How can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies.' And it came to pass when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death, that he told her all his heart and said to her, 'No razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man.' When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, 'Come up once more, for he has told me all his heart.' So the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hand. Then she lulled him to sleep on her knees and called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, 'The Philistines are upon you, Samson.' So he awoke from his sleep and said, 'I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free.' But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Then the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison." Man, there is so much in this passage. All that's left is his hair. All that's left is his symbol of credentials, as he was someone that was sanctified by God for a purpose, that he has been a mess up all his life. I've often wondered, why is this man even in Hebrews chapter 11? He's a screw up. Why is he even in there? And I learned something about him, but he lost his credentials. He breaks the final part of the vow. He's defiled fully and completely. His days are lost. His consecration is over. His strength from God is gone. And he didn't realize it while it was slipping away until it was too late, when it was gone in a moment. Look at that sad picture. When he wakes from sleep and says, "I'll go out as before at other times and shake myself free. I'll just get out of my mess like I've always been able to get out of my mess before. I'll just shake myself free like I've done at other times." And he didn't this time. Because the very last thing that separated Samson from any other Philistine was gone. I want you to understand that Samson didn't lose his strength because he lost his hair. He lost his strength because it says he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. He had nothing left to give to God. You remember at the conclusion of the ceremony, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. But what do you do when you're defiled? It says in Numbers 16, verse 9 through 12, it says, "And if anyone dies very suddenly beside him, and he defiles his consecrated head, then he shall shave his head on the day of his cleansing. On the 7th day he shall shave it. Then on the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons to the priest at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and the priest shall offer one as a sin offering, the other as a burnt offering, and make atonement for him because he sinned in regard to the corpse, and he shall sanctify his head that same day. He shall consecrate to the Lord the days of his separation, and bring a male lamb in its first year as a trespass offering. But the former days shall be lost, because his separation was defiled." Samson walked around, even though he was living like a pagan and a Philistine, he walked around fully acquainted with what it meant to be a Nazirite. And when his hair was gone, and he saw that the Lord had departed from him, he realized in that moment, all my former days are lost. Every good thing I can point to that I've done for Israel, it's gone. At this moment, I believe, had Samson dropped dead at this moment, he'd gone straight to hell. It was all of his days are worthless, all of his great feats, all of his strength, all of his gifting, all of that thing, it's gone in a moment. Samson at this point is a lost person, fully abandoned from the call to the call of God, and it's gone. And part of the closing of the ceremony is you take your hair and you shave it off and you throw it in the peace offering in the fire. Samson didn't even have his hair. He had nothing left to bring to God. It was impossible for him to fulfill his vow. How do you go back when you have been consecrated for your lifetime and you've blown it your whole life? You've blown it, and you can't even you have nothing left that you can bring to God because you gave it to a pagan woman or took it from you because you're in a place that you had no business being, with people you had no business associating with, dabbling in sin you had no business committing. His entire consecrated life gone. But then it says something interesting, because again, all of the wording is deliberate and inspired in the scripture. And I've always wondered, why is this little footnote even important? And I think it's part of what maybe sometimes confuses us as to what was the secret to Samson's hair, that he had strength. The secret to his strength was not his hair, it was his consecration. The secret to his strength was the presence of the Lord that departed from him. But it says this in verse 22, and when I understood the Nazirite vow, I read this verse and wept because I understood what this means. Verse 22, however, the hair of his head began to grow after it had been shaven. It's like, well, of course your hair grows. That's not what it's telling us. What it's telling us is that God was giving Samson a second chance. He was starting his Nazirite vow over as a bald, blind guy in prison. His hair began to grow again, was the external symbol of a sanctification process in his heart that began to happen again in his life. God was giving him his hair back so that he could have another chance at being a Nazirite. He was becoming a Nazirite, consecrated to God again. Judges 16, verse 28. Then Samson called to the Lord, saying, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them, one on his right and the other on his left. Then Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he pushed with all his might, and the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he had killed in his life. I want you to understand, it was in Samson's death that he brought his offering. Only this time, he'd squandered so much. He'd lost everything. The only offering he had was he sacrificed his own self. He became the offering. He wasted his life, but he completed his vow on a second chance by becoming the offering. He fulfills his vow of separation and death that he squandered in life. Which brings us back to Numbers 6:21. This is the law of the Nazirite who vows to the Lord the offering for his separation, and besides that, whatever else his hand is able to provide, according to the vow which he takes. So he must do according to the law of his separation. See, God had mercy on him, but there were still severe consequences. And some of you in here may identify to some degree with the story of Samson, and others of you might think that story is completely foreign. I don't have any great abilities or any great things that God's given me. Well, I want you to see another story of the power of consecration and another figure that was dramatically different in every way from Samson that lived in the exact same time. Her name was Ruth. She was seemingly completely insignificant. She lived during roughly the same time period as Samson. She was not near as spectacular, but no less important. Ruth was the polar opposite of Samson in nearly every way. 4 things about Ruth, and we'll move quickly through here. I am winding down, believe it or not. First lesson of Ruth is Ruth actually chose to be separate. Samson was a child prodigy from a good home with esteemed parents. Ruth came from Moab, which was an idolatrous nation that was akin to the Jews as it descended from Lot, Abraham's brother. That was one of Israel's oppressors during the time of the Judges. And the Moabites often practiced human sacrifice to the false god Chemosh. Thus, they were in even greater moral darkness than Israel itself. It was a truly despicable culture. That's where Ruth came from. Ruth's father-in-law was an esteemed man whose name meant "my God is king," but whose faith was perhaps tainted by the times of ignorance of God during which he lived. This was a time of moral relativism. And basically, her father-in-law was just a lukewarm believer. Ruth's mother-in-law was a wise, God-fearing woman whose name meant "pleasant one," but whose image of God became tainted by bitterness at the sudden loss of her husband and sons, and who had ceased to live up to her name for a period of time. Her husband, Ruth's husband, and her brother-in-law, Mahlon and Chilion, were the husbands and brother-in-law of Ruth. They seem to have strayed a bit from their faith by marrying pagan women whose names meant sick and punishing pain. They died suddenly after their father's death, leaving their widowed mother childless and the new bride's husbandless. Ruth and her sister-in-law were formerly pagan women who possessed both beauty and grace, who converted to faith in God. And shortly thereafter experienced famine and hardship, watched death rip through their families, losing their father-in-law and their husbands, leaving little in the way of companionship, but a grieving, bitter mother-in-law whom they cared for a great deal. Both Ruth and Orpah, that's her sister-in-law, went through the same horrible circumstances, but made completely different choices. One chose to walk away from God and leave her mother-in-law. One chose to forsake everything and stay with God and her mother-in-law, no matter how bad things had become. Ruth chose separation. Samson took it for granted. Lesson 2 about Ruth is, while she may have lacked advantages or special gifting from God, she developed character, which led to her success. Samson's gifting built him up, but his lack of character destroyed him. Ruth forsakes all, going to Bethlehem with her bitter mother-in-law. Though her father-in-law was an esteemed man in Bethlehem, she does humble work as a second-class foreign girl and lowly poor widow to provide food for her and Naomi, picking up leftover scraps in a wheat field after the harvesters had gleaned most of the good stuff. This was ancient welfare. The only difference of welfare in those days, it was available, but you still had to work for it if you could, and didn't come in the form of a government check. She had to go work the fields and get leftovers. She's at the most humble state of life. But she had tremendous character to do what she did and go through what she went through, because she was an honorable woman. Third lesson about Ruth is she faithfully obeyed until she experienced redemption. She faithfully obeyed until she experienced redemption. Samson's consistent disobedience ended with sacrifice. Ruth demonstrates obedience is better than sacrifice. Ruth's consistent faithfulness and character got the attention of Boaz, the grandson of Rahab the harlot, who would redeem her as his wife. Lesson number 4 about Ruth is she became part of a legacy. Samson's sacrifice took courage, but after he died, that was it. There were no little Samsons to live after him. There were no children. There was no legacy. There was nothing that got passed on. It was all gone. After Samson died, his greatness died with him. Ruth became the second Gentile woman after her husband's grandmother to be in the line of Christ and great-grandmother to King David. We can learn from Samson and the importance of consecration. We can learn that God gives us a second chance. But there's an even greater lesson that we can learn in that brief comparison of Ruth, and that's obedience is better than sacrifice. And in conclusion, to consecration and the consecrated life that I think is so foreign in the culture today and the church today. Because we're after the grapes and the grape skins and the grape juice and the vinegar mixed with strong drink and the vinegar mixed with, we're after how close can we get to that line. It's still okay because we want to be comfortable. We don't want to be extreme. We don't want to get called names. We don't want to be ridiculed. We don't want to be persecuted. We want to fit in. We want to make money, live the life. I think we're missing one of the most important parts of what being a Christian even is. And I'll leave you with a quote from Ignatius of Antioch, who was one of the early church fathers in the first 100 years. He wrote a letter to the Romans before he was to be killed and given to the beast to be devoured. And he wrote this letter to the Romans, and he said this, and I'll leave you with this quote. And I wish and I pray that there will be a consecration in the church today like these great men that are gone. That there'd be other great men that would rise up in great faith and let God do great things through them. Ignatius says, let fire in the cross, let the crowds of wild beasts, let tearings, breakings, and dislocations of bones, let cutting off of members, let shatterings of the whole body, and let all the dreadful torments of the devil come upon me. Only let me attain to Jesus Christ. Amen.